All right. So my name is Rob Zazueta. I work with a little company called Tibco. About a year ago, they purchased another company I was working for called Mastery. I've been with Mastery for 3 years. As you can tell by the obnoxious, loud accent, I am American. I came over here from San Francisco. My role at Tibco is to help our customers figure out how to make the most of their digital transformation, how to build a strategy around that, and really the way I like to say it is how to make money off of the money they're spending on us. That's our goal. And I've done this now for 3 years as part of Mastery as well, where we've helped people develop their API programs and really kind of get moving with that. And the way that this has come about is we have a lot of customers that started their API programs, came to Mastery, said, look, I know I need some kind of management. They put their APIs through that, but they're not sure how to grow it beyond that. And so we've seen pretty much every permutation of API program you can imagine. And we find that a lot of folks have really started with this idea of APIs as a product, which is actually something we've promoted for quite some time. If you don't have an API program yet, though, I'm hoping what you're going to get out of this talk is a little bit of knowledge about how to avoid some of these problems up front. What we've seen since Mastery started in 2006 is that APIs have evolved beyond a product, beyond one additional thing that you have in your system, and they're moving more and more to the core. And that's what you've heard over the last couple days so far, is how important APIs are to the growth of your company and to the digital transformation of your company. But it's important to understand if you already have an API program, where it started, and how do you get it from being that adjunct, that ancillary product, to being something that's a bit more central. So when I work with customers, we typically see APIs start in one of two ways. The first way is with the IT department. They want APIs because they have a project they're working on. They want to make it easier. They've had some exposure to APIs at a hackathon or integrating with another partner or something like that. And they've fallen in love with the idea of making this as easy as possible for themselves. Now, typically this means they started with one or two APIs for a specific project. Maybe the entire system is actually API first. And that's great. That's a great use for APIs. The problem with this, though, is typically it's effectively a science project. It's something that they tried as kind of a technical solution to a technical problem. And the only people that really know about that program are the folks in IT. There's no strategy around it. It's not like they've really talked to the folks in biz dev. They haven't talked to the lines of business to say, hey, look, we have this thing, and there's a lot of money benefit. There's a lot of business building benefit for having this API. No, typically it stays within IT, and it's viewed by everybody as a sole IT project. Now, before I go further, do you guys recognize who this is? He's a guy named Colin Furze, F-U-R-Z-E. Go onto YouTube and see the stuff that he builds. This is a jet-powered bike that he built. The guy is insane. But this idea of building this as a technology because it's cool, because it's fun, because it helps you get the job done. That's what happens in those IT organizations with APIs. Now, the other place that we typically see them start is actually on the biz dev side when you're trying to form partnerships. Lots of strategic partnerships require the sharing of data and knowledge. And typically this has been done through batch XML files, managed file transfer, FTP, that kind of thing. And then you get the request from some of those customers saying, well, don't you have an API for this? And so the biz dev team, the partnership team, they'll go to the IT team and say, hey, look, can we get an API for this? We're getting a request from a partner. And typically they'll create that API program. And it'll be pretty tightly coupled to that one use case. Maybe they'll be a little bit more forward thinking and say, well, maybe we'll have other partners coming on the line. But still, it's kind of treated as an ancillary product. It's still not central to the organization. So both of these, in my mind, are basically science projects. They're part of R&D. There's something that was built within the IT organization to accomplish one or two jobs, but doesn't really have a lot of strategy around this. And the thing is, when we're talking about the digital transformation of enterprises, what we're seeing here is that IT no longer holds all the keys. Technology is everybody's responsibility. And if that API program is tied to just one use case, or is just tied for technical reasons, a technical solution, without any thinking about what it can do for the business, you're really wasting a major opportunity, and you're not going to be able to grow. And you're not going to be able to call yourselves a digital business. Now, before I go much further, I do want to talk about what it means to be a digitally transformed company. Let's talk about what's going on. This is something that's been going on for the last decade or so. The lines of business back in the old days used to have to go to IT to say, hey, if I want this piece of software, I want this technology, IT needs to get the hardware, they need to get the software, they need to manage it. This can be a multi-month, multi-quarter project just to get this thing up and running. With the advent of software as a service, stuff like Salesforce, Marketo, the lines of business are actually able to go and get the job done and find the tools they need with little to no interruption from IT, little to no interaction. And they'll own that technology. Now, the benefit of that is IT doesn't have as much technical debt as a result. The lines of business can move a lot faster. They're able to get the job done. But the problem is customer interaction data. Who's clicking, who's opening, who's actually interacting with the stuff that I'm doing for the software as a service applications. It's locked away in those silos. And they're not easy to access. And so that's data, that's information that could be valuable to help you guys make better decisions and to better adapt to the needs of your customers. But it's spread amongst so many different silos and it's not necessarily intermingling with your existing core functionality. The other thing that we're seeing in terms of this transformation is that the lines of business are becoming developers themselves. They're either working with third-party development companies or they're working with developers they've brought in specifically for their needs. The best example of this is with the marketing departments. You're starting to see more and more seasonal style mobile applications popping up. These are not things that are intended to be a core product. They're not intended to be something that's going to go out there and be sold. It's really just intended to get more customers through the door. And they're small. And they may work and they may not. They may have a positive ROI and they may not. There's a need for having these things put out there quickly, cheaply, so that they can test that. And the ownership of that, if they keep going back to IT, it just means that you're going to have more and more technical debt. We've all had that conversation with our engineering team. If you want this, that means you don't get this. And so they're finding ways around this. Now, what we've seen is a lot of IT departments kind of starting to fight against this. But really, IT needs to embrace this. If they feel like they're becoming more irrelevant as a result of having these services out there and having this technology spread across the business. But the truth of the matter is IT is now more important than ever. They just have to shift the way they think from being the gatekeepers of technology to being service providers for that technology. That means really looking at the data that you have and getting it onto a common format and treating those as individual services that are decoupled from any particular use case. You still have a level of control and security over this. And you can still expose it in a way, especially if you have it that single service layer, you can see who's doing what, when, where, and how, can turn off the bad players, can turn on new people as they come on, and actually make the process of development much easier, much cleaner for the lines of business, as well as your own IT organization. Now, to get here, that means a transformation of the way that IT has done business and the way they have architected their solutions up to this point. I was a web developer for 15 years, and as I was coming up in development, what we were talking about in terms of web architecture was what we call N-tier architecture. And these days, you're starting to hear this as being referred to as monolithic, which I find hilarious, because the whole point behind N-tier architecture is the fact that, oh, is this working? There we go. I can scale horizontally at any one of these layers. If I want to scale vertically, it just means adding more stuff inside each layer. And it worked really well for the early days of the web, but we're starting to see it creak as more people are going on. And especially as we see more and more need for having that data exposed in a more consistent programmatic way. Traditionally in this N-tier architecture, when you're talking about adding an API layer, you're either adding it here to the application layer or you're adding it to the presentation layer. If you're adding it to the presentation or the application layer, that is by definition a product. It's working off of your data, but it's not, and working next to it, but everything else is not working off of it. And so those APIs have a tendency to stand alone. They have a tendency to evolve on their own, separate from the rest of the products they support. And that can turn into a big mess where you have problems where there's some features exist in the main product and some exist only in the API. You can have issues where the data is not consistent. It can create a lot of problems. But more importantly, this really limits you as you're trying to become a platform, as you're trying to become a digitally transformed business. What you need to get to is more of a platform style architecture. And what you can see here is all of that data is at the bottom, below that bottom dotted line. That's your legacy data, that's your applications. That's basically the core that IT controls. And then all of that is being fed into this API management layer, this external layer. Now it makes sense that these go out as web service APIs. You've noticed I have not said RESTful APIs, I haven't said GraphQL, I haven't said SOAP, I haven't said anything about the format. What matters most is that they're accessible in a consistent, clear, secure way. And how you choose to do that needs to be dependent upon the needs of your business, whether it's REST, whether it's even some kind of a messaging service. It's really up to you. The bottom line is it needs to be out there in a consistently exposed manner. Now, there's a lot of tools to help that transition come along. Subtle, right? There's a lot of tools that are there to make this easier for you. So it's not just a matter of ripping and replacing everything starting from scratch, especially when you're dealing with legacy software, you're dealing with that kind of end-tier architecture. There are tools that make it easy for you to turn this into consistent, clear services. So now, this is all fine and good, and that's the technical side. How do I make money off of it? I came over here 2 years ago, and I introduced the 5 API monetization models, but I've changed it. It's now the API, it's now the 5 platform monetization models. Big change. Because really, even though we were talking about APIs as products, we've been talking about this for years, and now we're talking about APIs as being the center of your IT infrastructure, the core of your digital transformation. The way that you make money off it doesn't change. It changes a little bit. If you're using the end-tier architecture and you're treating your APIs as products, basically you're focused on these first 3 ways of making money. These are the most direct ways. I'm charging directly for the API, either by making you pay a subscription or pay on a per-call basis. I'm doing it as an upsell. If you go in at the basic level, you get the SaaS product. If you go in at the silver level, you also get access to the APIs. And driving revenue-generating activities. This is building mobile applications, exposing this out to the world for affiliates to be able to use and drive sales and that kind of thing. If you are treating APIs as a product, the chances are pretty good you're stuck on these first 3 ways of making money. Now, once you transform to a platform-style architecture, when you start treating your APIs as the service layer that everything outside of the organization, outside of the core, accesses, it starts to make sense that you can continue to use these first 3, but then you open up these other 2. And that's making money through strategic partnerships, either by increasing your distribution and exposing yourselves to a new market that you didn't otherwise have access to, but that you now have access to through your customers, or by identifying revenue sharing opportunities, by sharing functionality, by selling access to your partners or vice versa, and adding stickiness and value to your existing platform. These 2 ways are really core to a platform. They allow you to build new products rapidly, to test things, to get it up there cheaply and quickly, and if it fails, your ROI isn't all that bad anyway. You haven't really spent that much, so you don't have to worry about it. And if it succeeds, it has a far greater chance of succeeding because getting to that ROI is a lot easier. So when you start thinking about platforms, this is where you can start focusing on making that money. And this is really how you start measuring your success. If I can reduce the amount of time it takes for me to get a new product up, a new mobile application, even a new internal application, if I can increase my distribution through those partnerships, and I can increase my revenue through those partnerships, then I've built a successful platform. It's kind of dense. There's a lot of dense stuff going on there. You guys still with me? You buying into this? This makes sense, right? Because we've been talking platforms for the last couple days, and we're going to continue to talk platforms. So the next question is, all right, you're right, Rob, I am in this situation. I have a science project. How do I get started? The first thing you need to do is understand what your API situation is within your organization. You've got to understand what APIs you have and how they're currently being used. And the best plan to do that is to go talk to your engineers and talk to your IT team. In my experience, if you bring them bourbon, they will become your friends for life. This is, again, speaking as a developer for 15 years. It always worked on me. So if you give a developer bourbon, he becomes your best friend for life, or she. Go find out what you have in terms of APIs and what the thinking is around this. There might be some technical strategy in place. You might already have some existing knowledge. You might already have something that you can use. The problem is a lot of these APIs were designed for very specific reasons. They were designed to make it easier to develop internal applications. They were designed to help make it easier to work with partners. And as a result, these APIs may not necessarily be ready for prime time. They may not necessarily be ready to expose to the world at large. So there's gonna be some effort involved in cleaning those APIs up, making them consistent, making them look better, making them actually ready to go outside. And again, this is a function you need to work with IT to make happen. The next step is to really think about how your APIs play with your core and how your IT organization is going to shift its role. And this is part of this bimodal architecture concept that Gartner and Forrester have been talking about quite a bit. The way we see it is your IT, traditional IT stuff sits at the core. Legacy databases, legacy systems, all that information. And with TIBCO, of course, we say you throw it on the bus, you make it accessible. You take that data, you make it accessible, you free it up so you can actually do things with it. Run it through analytics, build applications, identify patterns, understand your customers better. Getting it on the bus and freeing it up makes it so that I can take that data that is slow, that doesn't move very fast, and make it accessible to the edge, to your mobile applications, to your light microservices, to the partner applications that people are building. By adopting this type of thinking in terms of your architecture and putting IT in charge of that core and making them the service providers for everybody else, the lines of business, even the developers within the company, you're actually making it so the company can grow faster and can adapt to changes. Now, of course, with TIBCO, we talk about having this data and throwing it up into an API management layer. Obviously, I'm going to talk about Mastery. When we talk about API management, traditionally what we've always talked about is this idea of managing the traffic and managing partners, making sure that the keys are managed appropriately. I've got what I like to call scalability, security, and support. Those are the main 3 S's when we talk about API management. But what we now have with TIBCO and TIBCO Enterprise is something called the TIBCO Cloud Integration piece. This is actually an additional piece that takes our experience and knowledge with integration and exposes it to the cloud. I talked earlier about all those software as a service platforms where all that customer data is locked away in silos. TIBCO Cloud Integration is intended to help you free those silos. If I want to integrate with those SaaS providers, I have to take advantage of their APIs. And that typically means I have to have developers dedicated to that, which means I have to have developers who are operating on that, and I have to incur technical debt. TCI allows you to connect with these APIs with little to no code. And it makes it really easy for the IT non-developer orgs to get in there, take that data, create new services, and integrate it with your existing backend, your existing services. That frees that data. And then at that point, what IT's goal should be when it comes to these third-party, this shadow IT concept, rather than saying yes or no, they still need to know what's going on. They have to know the tools that the lines of business are using, and they should have some amount of veto power as to whether they use it or not, but they have to provide the criteria to the lines of the business to follow so they know how to select the right vendor. And part of that criteria has to be an API that allows me to have access to my data in that system. That has to be a key part of that criteria, which means the lines of business have to ask and look into that and at least be able to find that and do some level of evaluation. Otherwise, this doesn't work, and I can't free that data up. But TIBCO Cloud Integration makes this real easy. Now, once that data is accessible, once it's free, and I can start doing things with it, you gotta start doing things with it. Any new project that comes out that you would otherwise directly connect to the database, use the APIs. Anytime a new partner comes along that needs some set of data, don't build another script that produces an XML file that they have to go download from your FTP server. Build a set of services to provide that data and expose that through the service layer. If you've got folks who are building applications off of this and they're finding that some of the data is not there, the services are missing, that's an opportunity to add that service. And IT and engineering who are in charge of creating those services, whether they're doing it by developing those services or using a tool like BW6 or TCI or something like that to create the APIs dynamically through the data that's being posted onto the bus, one way or another, they need to think in terms of releasing this in a way that is decoupled from specific use cases and instead has the maximum utility for everybody who is consuming those services. The other thing that you can do is start taking advantage of the data that's coming out and plugging in something like Spotfire Analytics to start understanding the patterns of what's going on with your customers. Start understanding what's happening with the data at rest, and then apply some level of predictive analytics so that you can more rapidly react to customer needs and events in real time as they're happening. Again, having that data exposed as consistent APIs as opposed to relying on specific vendor technologies to connect to that means you have a maximum ability to adapt as things change. Now, once these APIs are out there, you've got that data exposed, that's fun, that's great, but it's completely worthless if you're not documenting it. We've seen these kinds of developer portfolios forever. Portals, not portfolios, developer portals. I go to a developer portal to get all the information I need about an API. When I go to a hackathon or I'm working with a new partner and I'm trying to figure out a way to integrate, the first thing I'm going to go do is developer.domain.com. And hopefully I'm going to get a site like this that tells me all about their API, how to sign up for a key, how to look for that documentation. This is for public-facing APIs. There's no reason in the world you shouldn't be doing this for your internal-facing APIs as well. Your developers externally are pretty much the same folks and have the same needs as your developers internally. And so you want to create a developer experience for them that gets out of their way of creating new applications. You want to be able to get them up and running and onboard them as rapidly as possible, whether they've been with you for 10 years or they just started last week. And this can really help with that. Most importantly, you got to make sure that as new APIs and new services are coming out, the documentation is keeping abreast of those services. You have to make sure everything is up to date, that this becomes the source of truth for the API. As new services are released, I know I can find them, and if I don't know about those services, I can discover them by coming here and digging around. But that's the final part too. It's not enough just to have a portal. You need to have evangelists. You need to have people internally who really, really understand your APIs, who really know what they're capable of doing, who also know what their deficiencies are so they can jump in and make recommendations when something's missing. Having one or more evangelists that you have activated who sit in all of your internal meetings, who listen to problems and concerns and planning about new projects and say, the API can address that. Oh, we can do that with the API. Actually, that's not a problem. We've got that data. The API has that problem already, or already has that data. We can solve that really easily. That's the person you want in all those meetings, where every problem is a nail and the APIs are their hammer. If you don't have that person going around and letting people know what's capable, what they can do, this is never going to grow, and you're never going to fully transform. And that means not just doing that in the technical meetings, not just doing it when you're doing your technical review and your code reviews. It also means when you're sitting with partners and you're sitting with the biz dev team and you're sitting with the marketing team. Don't shut up about the APIs. Be loud, be noisy about it. Make sure everybody knows what their capabilities are so that you're getting the maximum value for this and you can transform into a company that can adapt to anything that you throw at it. That's really the end game. It's freedom. It's being able to say yes. That's what APIs do. Well-designed, well-managed APIs allow your teams to say yes more often. Hey, there's a new product coming out, and we need to have an app on their ecosystem. Can we do that? Yes. And we can do it in a couple of months because we can hire an outside team to go ahead and do it because the APIs are there, so we don't even have to incur technical debt for it. You guys are familiar with the Amazon Echo, I assume? It's this really wicked device that can sit in your living room and it's constantly listening to you and eavesdropping on every creepy conversation you have. But if you tell it that you need to do something, hey, Amazon Echo, book me a ticket on Lufthansa to Frankfurt from SFO for next Thursday. It can actually do that. And the reason it can do that is because Lufthansa has those APIs. They're already accessible. All they had to do was go on and build an integration with the Amazon Echo, and they were able to leverage that the second it came out. When somebody said, hey, we should have an Echo integration, they were able to say yes. The goal is to get to becoming an organization that can adapt to whatever the market throws at you, and whatever your customers throw at you. And that's my talk. Thank you very much. I think I caught Travis. Oh, there he is. Here he is. I thought I caught you by surprise. Hot mic.
Questions? Any questions for Rob?
Any questions? Anything burning? Did I create more questions than I answered? That happens. It's not on.
It's not on at all.
Yell loud. I can repeat whatever you say.
Okay. Hello? I thought it was interesting. I thought it was an interesting point you made about the N-tier architecture. I mean, we've been trying to do microservices, but with a different name for a very long time.
That name was SOA, by the way.
Sure. I mean, we had the right idea and the right sort of starting point, but where did we go wrong, and is it different this time, and are we going to be doing something different in the future, and what are some lessons learned there?
It's a whole separate talk that
Totally.
I gave a couple weeks ago. It's good. You're right. None of this is new. When we talked about the idea of IT becoming a service organization, this is what SOA was. That was the promise of SOA. The problem, I think, was service-oriented architecture got very much caught up in a lot of, well, it's interesting. When you look at kind of the old school SOA and sort of the modern way that we talk about REST, SOA was all about all of the WS star standards, all these crazy things that had to be defined by the OASIS organization, and all these variety of different organizations that had to get buy-in from the major vendors and all that. And we got this big old mess of spaghetti. Lots and lots of overhead, really focused on internal point-to-point integrations, not really thinking in terms of the constrained devices that came along with mobile and now IoT. And then separate from that, we have these RESTful web services that kind of emerged from this need to have something that was leaner and lighter, but for which we really don't have a set of standards. There's working committees, and there's all kinds of different, organizations that are out there talking about the best ways to do this, but at the end of the day, no one's sitting around waiting for any specific committee to come up with the approvals. We're following the RFCs and following best practices and doing what we can do. So it's moved a lot faster, but it's been a bit messier as a result, but it's actually worked really well. The problems that we had with SOA, from my perspective, are around discoverability, around, governance, whatever that means to you, and making sure that they're secure, and then also making sure that they were developed in a way that was consistent, that consistency across the board. Those problems still exist when we talk about microservices. That doesn't go away. The good news is because microservices is more aligned with APIs and API management, we have a lot of tools already in place that make this easier, but they still require the developers and the folks who are actually managing these APIs to make the right decisions, to document everything, to put everything into a single pane of glass so you can clearly see where everything's coming from, to make sure that the design of the APIs is consistent from service to service, that you have an enterprise architecture team or a style, an API style team that dictates what that style is and does some level of review, but really focuses more on disseminating the information across the organization rather than being a bottleneck. There's a lot of things that can be done to avoid those problems. I see us going down that path if we're not careful, but the good news, I feel like we have a different handle on it. We've learned from those mistakes, so things are going to be better this time.
We have time for another question if someone has one. All right. Well, Rob.
I answered everybody's questions with my talk. That is a success.
That is a success. So as
I'll
a
take
small
it.
token of our appreciation for booking your trip, you can give
Righteous.
this to your Echo for booking that and getting you over here.
I absolutely will. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
All right.